Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the Dire Volf watching the stars blur past through the main view screen, and the war had been going on for 12 long years now between humans and the Zephyrians, and Jake was tired of all the fighting and death. He had seen too much of both sides destroying each other for reasons that seemed less clear each passing day. The Dire Volf was a small stealth ship built for secret missions behind enemy lines, and Jake had commanded her for 3 years. Now, running dangerous operations that most captains would never attempt, and his crew trusted him completely even when his orders seemed crazy, because Jake always brought them home alive. Lieutenant Amy Chun walked up to Jake with a datapad in her hands, and her face showed concern about something important. And Jake knew that look meant trouble was coming their way again, like it always did in this endless war between the two great powers of the galaxy. Amy handed him the pad and spoke quietly so the other crew members could not hear what she was saying, and Jake looked at the information on the screen and saw that they had picked up a distress signal from somewhere near Kepler Station, which was supposed to be neutral territory, where neither side was allowed to fight. The signal was weak and broken, but Jake could tell it was coming from a Zephyrian ship that was in serious trouble and needed help right away, and most human captains would ignore such a signal, or maybe even attack the damaged enemy vessel. But Jake was different from most captains in the human fleet. He studied the signal more carefully and saw that it was a diplomatic ship, not a military vessel, and that meant there might be important people on board who could be valuable prisoners or sources of information about Zephyrian plans and movements in this sector of space. But Jake also knew that rescuing enemies was against all military rules, and his superiors would not understand why he would risk his ship and crew to save Zephyrians who had been killing humans for over a decade, and the war had made both sides hate each other with a passion that burned like fire. Amy waited for his decision, and Jake could see that she was worried about what he might choose to do, because she knew him well enough to understand that he sometimes made choices that other people thought were wrong or dangerous, or both at the same time. Jake looked around the bridge at his crew and saw Sergeant Ben Parker standing near the weapons console with his arms crossed and a frown on his face, because Ben hated all Zephyrians and wanted to kill every one of them he could find, and Ben would not like any decision to help the enemy. The other crew members were watching Jake carefully because they all knew he was thinking about something important, and they trusted his judgment even when they did not understand his reasons for making certain choices that seemed to go against everything they had been taught about fighting this war. Jake made his decision and told Amy to set course for the distress signal at maximum speed, and Amy looked surprised, but she followed his orders without question, because that was what good officers did, even when they thought their captain might be making a mistake that could get them all killed. Ben Parker stepped forward and asked Jake why they were going to help Zephyrians when those same aliens had killed so many of their friends and comrades over the years of fighting, and Jake understood Ben's anger because he felt the same way sometimes when he remembered all the good people who had died in this war. Jake explained that they needed to investigate the situation, and maybe they could capture some important prisoners or gather intelligence about enemy movements and plans, and this explanation seemed to satisfy Ben, even though Jake knew the real reason was more complicated than that simple answer. The Dire Volf changed course and headed toward the source of the distress signal, and Jake ordered his crew to prepare for possible combat because Zephyrian rescue ships might arrive at any time and turn this rescue mission into a deadly battle that none of them wanted to fight today. As they got closer to the signal, Jake could see on the main screen that the Zephyrian ship was badly damaged and drifting in space, with no power and no ability to defend itself, and the ship looked like it had been attacked by someone, but Jake could not tell who had done the damage. Amy reported that there were life signs on the damaged ship, but they were getting weaker by the minute, and if they were going to save anyone, they needed to act quickly before all the survivors died from their injuries or lack of oxygen in the damaged vessel. Jake ordered his crew to prepare the docking bay for rescue operations and told the medical team to get ready for wounded prisoners who might need immediate treatment, and he also ordered Ben to have security teams ready in case any of the rescued Zephyrians tried to cause trouble on his ship. The Dire Volf moved carefully toward the damaged vessel, and Jake could see that it was a small diplomatic ship not much bigger than his own vessel, and it had been shot up pretty badly by someone using military-grade weapons that had torn holes in the hull and damaged the main engine. Amy established a communication link with the dying ship, and they received a transmission from someone inside who was asking for help in the Zephyrian language, and Amy translated the message for Jake and told him that there were 12 survivors on board, including someone very important. Jake ordered the rescue operation to begin, and his crew moved quickly to dock with the damaged ship and bring the survivors aboard the Direwolf, and Jake watched as his people worked to save lives, even though those lives belonged to their enemies in this terrible war. The first survivors came through the airlock, and they were all injured and scared, and Jake could see that they were not soldiers but diplomats and civilians who had been caught in an attack they never expected, and one of them was a female Zephyrian who was more badly hurt than the others. The medical team took the wounded female to the sick bay immediately, and Jake followed them because something about her seemed different and important. And when he saw her face, he realized that she was not just any Zephyrian, but someone who might change everything. About this rescue mission, Amy came up beside Jake and whispered that the female was Princess Lyra Voss, who was third in line to the Zephyrian throne and one of their most important military leaders, and Jake realized that he had just rescued the enemy princess, and now he had to decide what to do with her. Princess Lyra Voss lay unconscious on the medical table in the sick bay of the Direwolf, and Dr. Carl White worked frantically to save her life using human medical technology that was far more advanced than anything the Zephyrians had developed. And Jake watched through the observation window as his doctor fought to keep the enemy princess alive. The princess had suffered severe internal injuries from the attack on her ship, and she had lost a lot of blood, and her vital signs were getting weaker every minute, and Dr. White told Jake that she would die without immediate treatment using human nanomeds that could repair damage at the cellular level. Jake faced the hardest decision of his military career, because saving the princess would mean using their limited supply of advanced medical nanobots on an enemy who might later use any information she learned about human technology against them in future battles, and his crew was already unhappy about rescuing Zephyrians. In the first place, Ben Parker stood behind Jake and spoke in a low, angry voice about how they should let the princess die and use her body as proof that they had eliminated an important enemy leader, and Ben reminded Jake that this woman had probably planned attacks that killed many human soldiers over the years. Amy Chun disagreed with Ben and pointed out that keeping the princess alive could give them valuable intelligence about Zephyrian military plans, and she might be willing to trade information for her life, and Amy thought they should at least try to save her before making any final decisions about what to do next. Jake looked at the dying princess through the window and saw that she was young and had probably never wanted this war any more than he did. And something about her face reminded him that she was a person, not just an enemy, and he made his choice. Despite knowing his crew would not understand, he told Dr. White to use the nanomeds and save the princess regardless of the cost, and Ben Parker cursed and walked away from the sick bay, while Amy looked relieved that Jake had chosen to preserve life instead of letting someone die when he had the power to prevent it. The nanomeds began working immediately, and Jake could see the princess's vital signs starting to improve as the tiny medical robots repaired her damaged organs and stopped the internal bleeding that would have killed her within the hour. And Dr. White smiled for the first time since the rescue operation began. While the medical treatment continued, Jake ordered his engineering team to assess the damage to the Direwolf from the rescue operation, and Chief Engineer Pete Santos reported that their hyperspace engines had been damaged when they docked with the burning Zephyrian ship, and they were now stranded in this sector until repairs could be completed. Amy brought Jake more bad news when she reported that both human and Zephyrian fleets were moving toward their position, and they would arrive within 6 hours, and Jake realized that they were trapped between two military forces that would both want to capture or destroy the Direwolf for different reasons. The human fleet would want to know why Jake had rescued enemy diplomats instead of destroying them, and the Zephyrian fleet would want to recover their princess and punish the humans who had taken her prisoner, and Jake knew that neither side would believe his story about trying to save lives. Ben Parker returned to the bridge with several other crew members who were upset about the situation, and Ben demanded to know why Jake was risking all their lives to save one Zephyrian princess when they could have escaped easily if they had just left the damaged ship to drift in space. Jake tried to explain his reasoning, but Ben interrupted him and said that the crew was losing faith in his leadership, and maybe it was time for someone else to make decisions about their survival, and Jake could see that some of his people were starting to agree with Ben's arguments. The situation got worse when Princess Lyra woke up in the sick bay and immediately tried to escape from the medical restraints that Dr. White had placed on her to keep her still during the treatment, and she fought with surprising strength for someone who had been dying just hours earlier. Jake went to the sick bay to talk with the princess, and she looked at him with fierce purple eyes that showed no fear, even though she was a prisoner on an enemy ship, and she spoke in perfect English, which surprised Jake because most Zephyrians refused to learn human languages. She asked Jake why he had saved her life when he could have let her die and taken credit for killing an important enemy leader, and Jake found himself struggling to answer her question because he was not entirely sure of his own motives for making such a dangerous choice. The princess studied Jake's face carefully and told him that she had been traveling to a secret meeting where she planned to argue against a new Zephyrian superweapon that could destroy entire star systems, and she said that extremists in her own government wanted her dead because she opposed the weapon. Jake realized that the princess might not be his enemy after all, and that both of them might be caught in the middle of a larger conflict between people who wanted the war to continue forever and people who wanted it to end before it destroyed both civilizations completely. Amy came to the sick bay and reported that enemy ships were getting closer and they needed to make a decision about where to go and what to do with their prisoners, and Jake looked at Princess Lyra and saw that she was listening carefully to everything they said. The princess surprised Jake by offering to help them escape from the approaching fleets, and she explained that she knew about hidden asteroid fields where they could hide while making repairs to their damaged ship, and she said she would guide them there if Jake promised not to turn her over to either side. Ben Parker arrived in the sick bay and heard the princess making her offer, and he laughed bitterly and said that trusting a Zephyrian was the stupidest thing any human could do, and she would probably lead them into a trap where her people could capture or kill them. Old Princess Lyra looked directly at Ben and spoke in a calm voice about how she understood his hatred because the war had hurt people on both sides, and she had lost friends and family members too, but revenge would not bring back the dead or end the fighting that was destroying their worlds. Jake made another difficult decision and accepted the princess's offer to guide them to safety, and Ben Parker shook his head in disgust and told Jake that he was making a mistake that would get them all killed, and several other crew members agreed with Ben's assessment of the situation. Wolf changed course following the princess's directions, and Jake hoped that he was not leading his crew into a trap, but something about Lyra made him believe that she was telling the truth about wanting to escape from both fleets and find a safe place to hide. As they traveled toward the asteroid field, Jake noticed that the princess was studying the human technology around her with great interest, and she asked intelligent questions about their ship systems, and Jake began to realize that she was not just a royal figure but also a skilled engineer and strategist. The asteroid field that Princess Lyra had guided them to was vast and filled with the wreckage of ancient battles from wars that had been fought long before humans or Zephyrians had ever traveled between the stars, and Jake ordered his crew to hide the dire Wolf deep among the floating rocks and debris where enemy sensors could not detect them. Chief Engineer Pete Santos worked alongside Princess Lyra to repair the damaged hyperspace engines, and Jake was amazed to see how quickly she understood human technology and how her knowledge of Zephyrian engineering helped solve problems that his crew had been struggling with for hours. Ben Parker watched the princes working with their people, and his anger seemed to be fading as he saw that she was genuinely trying to help them survive and escape from the fleets that were hunting them. And Jake noticed that even Ben was starting to listen to her suggestions about repairs and modifications while exploring the asteroid field. To gather materials for the engine repairs, Amy Chun made a disturbing discovery when she found the wreckage of ships from both human and Zephyrian fleets that had supposedly been destroyed by enemy action, according to official military reports from both sides. Jake and Princess Lyra examined the wrecked ships together, and they used portable scanners to analyze the weapon damage on the hulls, and what they found made both of them question everything they thought they knew about the war that had been raging for 12 long years. The human ships had been destroyed by human weapons, and the Zephyrian ships had been destroyed by Zephyrian weapons, and this meant that both sides had been attacking their own people and making it look like enemy action to keep the war going when peace might have been possible years ago. Princess Lyra became very quiet and thoughtful as she studied the evidence, and she told Jake that she had always wondered why some battles seemed to go wrong for no apparent reason, and why certain ships were always in the wrong place at the wrong time. During major engagements, Jake felt sick as he realized that soldiers from both sides had been dying not to protect their homes and families, but to make certain powerful people rich and keep them in positions of authority, and the whole war might have been based on lies and deception from the very beginning. Amy discovered more evidence hidden in the computer systems of the wrecked ships, and she found communications between high-ranking officers from both fleets discussing plans to eliminate ships whose crews might question orders or ask too many questions about the real reasons for continuing the fighting. The conspiracy involved Admiral Rick Stone from the human fleet, who had been Jake's commanding officer, and War Marshal Crixthorne from the Zephyrian military, who was Princess Lyra's uncle, and both men had been working together to prolong the war for their own benefit. Princess Lyra explained that she had been traveling to the secret meeting to present evidence about a planned false flag operation where Zephyrian extremists would use the new superweapon against their own colonies and blame the attack on human forces to justify even more aggressive military action. Jake understood now why the princess's own people had attacked her diplomatic ship, because she had discovered the truth about the conspiracy and was trying to stop the next phase of the plan that would have killed millions of innocent people on both sides. Ben Parker joined them in examining the evidence, and his face showed the anger and betrayal that Jake was feeling because Ben had lost his brother in a battle that they now knew had been arranged by the conspirators to eliminate ships whose crews were asking too many questions. The three of them worked together to copy all the evidence from the wrecked ships, and Princess Lyra used her knowledge of Zephyrian communication codes to access files that human technology could not decode, and Jake was impressed by her skills and dedication to finding the truth. Amy reported that the search fleets were getting closer to their hiding place, and they would be discovered within a few hours unless they found a way to escape or convince both sides that they were not a threat, and Jake knew that neither option would be easy to accomplish. Princess Lyra proposed a desperate plan that would require them to broadcast the evidence they had discovered to both fleets simultaneously and expose the conspiracy to thousands of military personnel who had no idea that their own leaders were betraying them. Jake realized that such a broadcast would be extremely dangerous because the conspirators would try to destroy the Dervolf before the evidence could reach the entire fleet, and they would need to time everything perfectly to have any chance of survival. Ben Parker surprised everyone by volunteering to help with the plan, even though it meant trusting Princess Lyra completely, and he said that if their own leaders had been lying to them, then maybe it was time to work with former enemies to find the truth. The crew of the Direwolf spent the next several hours preparing for the most dangerous mission of their lives, and Princess Lyra taught them how to modify their communication systems to penetrate Zephyrian military networks while Jake planned their escape route through the asteroid field. Amy discovered that the approaching fleets included ships commanded by officers who were part of the conspiracy, and these vessels would try to destroy any evidence of the secret alliance between Admiral Stone and War Marshal Thorne before it could be revealed to other military personnel. Princess Lyra worked with Dr. White to prepare medical evidence showing how human nanomids had saved her life, and she planned to use this as proof that cooperation between their species was possible and beneficial for everyone involved in the conflict. Jake made the decision to attempt the broadcast during the largest space battle that had been planned for the Proxima 7 system, where both fleets would be gathered in one location and communication channels would be monitored by the maximum number of people from both sides. The plan required them to reach Proxima 7 ahead of the main fleets and position themselves where they could transmit to both sides simultaneously while avoiding the ships that would try to stop them, and Jake knew that one mistake would mean death for all of them. Ben Parker asked Princess Lyra why she was willing to risk her life to help humans when her own people would consider her a traitor for working with the enemy, and she replied that peace was more important than politics, and that both species deserved to know the truth as they prepared to leave the asteroid field. Jake reflected on how much had changed since they had first rescued the princess, and how working together had shown him that Zephyrians were not so different from humans in their desire to protect their families and find meaning in their lives. Princess Lyra stood beside Jake on the bridge as they prepared for the dangerous journey to Proxima 7, and she told him that whatever happened next, they had already accomplished something important by proving that former enemies could work together when they shared a common goal. The journey to Proxima 7 would take them through the most dangerous space in the galaxy, where both human and Zephyrian patrol ships hunted for enemies, and Jake knew that the Dear Volf would have to avoid detection by vessels from both fleets while carrying evidence that could end the war or get them all killed. Princess Lyra worked with Chief Engineer Pete Santos to modify the ship's stealth systems using a combination of human and Zephyrian technology that had never been tried before, and the result was a hybrid vessel that could fool the sensors of both species if everything worked according to their calculations. Jake studied the route to Proxima 7 and saw that they would need to pass through at least 3 checkpoint systems, where military scanners would examine every ship that tried to enter the battle zone, and Amy Chun suggested using false identification codes that Princess Lyra could provide from her diplomatic credentials. The first test of their modified stealth system came when they approached the outer checkpoint near the Tau Ceti system, and Jake ordered his crew to remain completely silent while automated scanners examined their ship and tried to determine if they were friend or foe. The scanners detected a Zephyrian diplomatic vessel with proper authorization codes and allowed them to pass through the checkpoint without challenge, and Jake was amazed that their disguise had worked so perfectly, and Princess Lyra smiled with satisfaction at their success. Ben Parker monitored the communication channels and reported that both fleets were moving toward Proxima 7 for what military leaders were calling the final battle that would end the war once and for all, and Jake knew that the conspirators planned to use this battle to eliminate anyone who might oppose their continued control. The second checkpoint was more difficult because it was manned by human officers who would recognize that something was wrong if they looked too closely at the modified Dire Volf, and Jake had to use all his knowledge of military procedures to convince the checkpoint commander to let them pass. Amy Chun created false mission orders that made it appear that Princess Lyra was being transported to Proxima 7 for a prisoner exchange, and the checkpoint commander accepted this explanation without asking too many questions, because prisoner exchanges were common during wartime. As they traveled deeper into the war zone, Jake noticed that Princess Lyra was becoming more nervous, and she explained that her cousin Prince Zark Voss commanded one of the Zephyrian battle groups, and he had been ordered to kill her if he found her alive because she knew too much about the conspiracy. Jake assured the princess that they would protect her from her cousin and anyone else who tried to harm her, and Ben Parker nodded in agreement because he had come to respect Princess Lyra during their time working together, and he no longer saw her as an enemy. The third checkpoint was the most dangerous because it was controlled jointly by both human and Zephyrian forces, and they used advanced scanners that could detect even the smallest inconsistencies in ship design or crew composition, and Jake knew that their hybrid modifications might not fool these sophisticated sensors. Princess Lyra suggested that they create a distraction by broadcasting a fake distress signal from another location, and when the checkpoint scanners turned to investigate the signal, the Dire Volf could slip past undetected, and Jake agreed that this plan had the best chance of success. Amy Chun created the false distress signal and transmitted it from a probe that they launched toward an empty area of space, and the checkpoint sensors immediately focused on the fake emergency while the Dire Volf passed through the scanning zone without being properly examined. Once they were past the final checkpoint, Jake could see the massive fleets gathering around Proxima 7, and he had never seen so many warships in one place before, and the sight made him realize how devastating this battle would be if the conspirators succeeded in their plan to eliminate. Moderate voices from both sides. Princess Lyra used her diplomatic access codes to monitor military communications from both fleets, and she reported that Admiral Stone and War Marshal Thorn were coordinating their attack plans to ensure maximum casualties among ships commanded by officers who might question their authority. Jake made the decision to position the Dire Wolf in the asteroid belt around Proxima 7, where they could hide until the battle began and then emerge to broadcast their evidence when both fleets would be focused on fighting each other instead of looking for hidden threats. Ben Parker worked with Princess Lyra to prepare the evidence files for transmission, and they organized the information so that it would be impossible for anyone to dismiss or ignore the proof of conspiracy between the highest levels of both military organizations. Dr. White treated the remaining Zephyrian survivors from Princess Lyra's diplomatic mission, and they agreed to help with the broadcast by providing their own testimony about the attack on their ship and how they had been saved by human medical technology. And Compassion Amy Chun programmed the communication systems to transmit simultaneously to both fleets using a combination of human and Zephyrian broadcast frequencies, and she tested the system repeatedly to make sure it would work properly when they only had one chance to get their message through as the battle fleets moved into their final positions. Jake watched the tactical displays and saw thousands of ships preparing for combat, and he knew that many good people on both sides would die in the next few hours unless their desperate plan succeeded in exposing the truth. Princess Lyra stood beside Jake on the bridge and told him that she was proud to serve with him and his crew even though they had been enemies just days earlier. And she said that their cooperation proved that peace between their species was not only possible but inevitable. The moment came when both fleets opened fire on each other in the space around Proxima 7, filled with energy beams and missile explosions. And Jake ordered the Derivolf to emerge from hiding and begin broadcasting the evidence that would change everything. Ben Parker activated the transmission systems, and Amy Chun monitored the reception on both fleets to make sure their signal was getting through, and Princess Lyra spoke directly to her own people while Jake addressed the human forces, and both of them urged their listeners to examine the evidence with open minds. The response was immediate and shocking as ships from both fleets suddenly stopped firing and turned their weapons toward the vessels commanded by the conspirators, and Jake realized that their broadcast had worked better than they had dared to hope. Admiral Stone tried to destroy the Derivolf with a concentrated missile attack, but his own ships refused to obey his orders, and instead they protected the small vessel that had revealed his treachery. And War Marshal Thorn suffered the same fate when his officers turned against him. Princess Lyra watched her cousin Prince Zark attempt to rally the extremist faction, but most of the Zephyrian fleet ignored his orders and followed the evidence that proved their leaders had been lying to them for years, and Jake saw that their desperate gamble had succeeded beyond their wildest dreams. The space around Proxima 7 became eerily quiet as thousands of warships from both fleets stopped fighting and drifted in formation while their crews tried to understand what they had just learned from the broadcast that had revealed 12 years of lies and deception by their own leaders. Jake stood on the bridge of the Dire Wolf watching the tactical display as Admiral Stone's flagship was surrounded by human vessels whose commanders had turned against him, and the Admiral was screaming orders that no one would obey because everyone now knew he was a traitor who had been working with the enemy princess. Lyra monitored the Zephyrian communications and reported that War Marshal Thorn was facing the same rebellion from his officers, and that her cousin Prince Zark was trying to rally support for continuing the attack, but most ships were refusing to follow his commands. Captain Lisa Ward of the human cruiser Thunder Bay contacted the Dire Wolf and asked to speak with Jake directly. And when her face appeared on the main screen, Jake could see that she was angry about the conspiracy, but also grateful that someone had finally exposed the truth. Captain Ward told Jake that she had suspected corruption in the high command for years but had never been able to prove it, and she thanked him for risking everything to bring the evidence to light, and she asked what he wanted the human fleet to do next. Jake looked at Princess Lyra and saw that she was listening carefully to the conversation, and he realized that this was the moment when they could either end the war or watch it continue under new leaders, who might be just as corrupt as the old ones. Princess Lyra stepped forward and addressed Captain Ward directly, and she proposed that representatives from both fleets meet aboard the Direwolf to discuss an immediate ceasefire and the possibility of permanent peace between their species. Captain Ward agreed to the meeting and asked Admiral Rex Hunt of the Zephyrian fleet to join the discussion, and Hunt responded positively because he had always believed that the war was unnecessary and that both species could benefit from cooperation. Instead of endless conflict, Ben Parker suggested that they should also invite some of the junior officers who had been most affected by the conspiracy, and Princess Lyra agreed that including younger voices would help ensure that future leaders would not repeat the mistakes of the past. Amy Chun prepared the conference room aboard the Direwolf for the historic meeting, and Jake realized that his small ship was about to become the birthplace of peace between two civilizations that had been trying to destroy each other for over a decade. The first shuttle arrived, carrying Captain Ward and 3 other human officers, and Jake greeted them personally and escorted them to the conference room where Princess Lyra was waiting with data files containing all the evidence they had discovered. Admiral Hunt arrived with his delegation a few minutes later, and Jake watched as former enemies shook hands and began talking about their shared experiences of being betrayed by leaders they had trusted and followed into battle. Princess Lyra presented the evidence systematically and showed how the conspiracy had manipulated both sides into continuing a war that could have ended years earlier if the truth had been known, and Jake saw that everyone in the room was shocked by the extent of the deception. Captain Ward asked what would happen to the conspirators, and Admiral Hunt replied that they would face justice from their own people and that both fleets had already begun arresting officers who had participated in the false flag operations. Ben Parker spoke about how the war had affected ordinary soldiers and crew members who had lost friends and family members for no good reason, and his words helped everyone understand the human cost of the conspiracy that had prolonged the conflict. Dr. White brought in the Zephyrian survivors from Princess Lyra's diplomatic mission, and they testified about how human medical technology had saved their lives and how working together had shown them that cooperation was better than conflict. Discussions continued for hours as representatives from both sides worked out the details of a ceasefire agreement, and Jake was amazed at how quickly former enemies could find common ground when they were not being manipulated by corrupt leaders. Princess Lyra suggested that the Direwolf should become a symbol of the new cooperation between humans and Zephyrs, and that it should serve as a neutral meeting place where both species could work together on projects that would benefit everyone. Amy Chun proposed establishing joint research stations where human and Zephyrian scientists could share knowledge and develop new technologies that neither species could create alone, and this idea was enthusiastically supported by both delegations. Captain Ward and Admiral Hunt signed the ceasefire agreement using the same table where Jake had made the decision to rescue Princess Lyra, and Jake realized that his choice to show compassion to an enemy had led directly to this moment of peace. The news of the ceasefire spread quickly to both fleets, and Jake could see on the communication screens that crews from both sides were celebrating the end of the war, and many ships were already beginning to work together on joint patrols of the neutral zone. Princess Lyra thanked Jake for saving her life and for giving her the chance to help end the war, and she said that she hoped to continue working with humans to build a better future for both species, and Jake told her that she would always be welcome aboard the Direwolf. Ben Parker admitted that he had been wrong about Zephyrians and that working with Princess Lyra had taught him that former enemies could become trusted friends when they shared common goals and values, and he volunteered to serve on one of the new joint cruises. The final scene showed the Direwolf floating in space between the two great fleets that were no longer enemies, and the small ship displayed both human and Zephyrian insignia as a symbol of the peace that had begun with one captain's decision to save a life instead of taking it. Jake stood on the bridge with Princess Lyra and his crew and watched as shuttles moved between ships carrying officers and diplomats who were working together to plan a future without war, and he knew that their accidental peace would grow into something far greater than anyone had imagined possible, the war that had lasted 12 years had ended not through victory or defeat, but through the simple human act of showing mercy to an enemy, and Jake understood that sometimes the most important battles were won not by destroying your opponents, but by finding the courage to save them instead.